My name is Mara Kessler. I am 34 years old, and I spent 11 months overseas keeping strangers alive, while my own family rehearsed how to destroy me. The first thing my husband said when I walked through our front door was not hello. He looked past the uniform, past the 11 months, and he said, "The results came back, Mara. Lily was never mine, and everyone in this room knows exactly what you did." Behind him, on my own couch, sat his mother, his brother, and two aunts I had fed at every holiday. They were arranged like a jury that had already reached a verdict, and they were waiting for me to fall apart. I did not fall apart. I did not scream. I did not drop my bag, and I did not beg a single one of them to believe me. My daughter stood by the stairs in her socks, holding the stuffed rabbit I had mailed her from the base, and her eyes kept moving between her father and me. So I set my duffel down slowly, I kept my voice level, and I looked at the paper trembling in his hand. And that is when I noticed the first mistake, because the date printed across the top of that report was wrong. What Grant did not know, what nobody smirking on that couch knew, was that a real laboratory 2 states away still held a sealed record with my name on it. A woman named Sandra had signed it almost 4 years earlier, and no one in that room had ever heard of her. Grant thought he had already won. He had rehearsed his ending down to the last cruel line. He had no idea that the envelope I would open 11 days later would take everything from him, in front of these same faces. But to understand how a soldier walked into an ambush inside her own living room, you have to go back to the spring before I deployed. I met Grant Mercer when I was 26, at a wedding where he told me I was the most stubborn woman he had ever argued with. I thought that was a compliment. For a while, it was. We married the next year, and for the first 2 years he seemed proud that I wore a uniform, that I could fix a generator, that I did not need him to rescue me. His mother Diane felt differently from the very first dinner. She watched me the way a landlord watches a tenant she suspects of hiding a dog. She would smile with her mouth and study me with her eyes, and she asked, again and again, when I planned to stop playing soldier and start acting like a wife. When Lily was born, in the summer she turned everything soft and terrifying. I thought a grandchild might finally thaw her. Instead, Diane held my daughter for the first time, looked at her tiny face, and said, "Well, she certainly doesn't have any Mercer in her, does she?" I told myself it was a strange woman making a strange joke. I was wrong. It was the first brick in a wall she spent 6 years building. Here is the detail that saved my life, though I did not know it then. When Lily was 14 months old, the Army flagged a records error during my transfer, and her dependent status came into question. To clear it, I enrolled her fully in the system, and resolving the flag meant establishing paternity through an accredited laboratory. So in the winter of that year, Grant and Lily and I sat in a small clinic while a technician named Sandra Okafor swabbed all 3 of us. She sealed each sample in front of us, she logged the chain of custody, and she had us sign beside the barcodes. 2 weeks later, an accredited report confirmed, at 99.99%, that Grant Mercer was Lily's biological father. He laughed when it came in the mail. He put it in a drawer. He forgot it existed. I did not forget, because I am the kind of person who keeps every document a government has ever touched. If you are watching this and you have ever kept the receipts on people who swore you would never need them, tell me where you are watching from, and stay with me, because those receipts are about to matter more than anyone in that living room could imagine. The years that followed were quiet in the way a slow leak is quiet. Grant lost a job, then another, and each time his mother explained that a real wife would have made things easier at home. My deployments became, in her retelling, proof that I loved the Army more than my child. Grant started repeating her words back to me, first as jokes, then as accusations. By the time Lily was 5, Diane was at our house 4 days a week, and she had opinions about everything, including whose eyes my daughter had. She would hold up old photographs of Grant as a baby, then hold them next to Lily, and shake her head slowly so I could see her do it. Money got tighter, and I did not see how tight, because I trusted the man I had married with our joint account. We owned our house through a loan tied to my service, a fact Grant found embarrassing and Diane found unforgivable. When my orders came through for an 11-month deployment, I sat Lily on my lap and promised her I would call every single week. Grant stood in the kitchen doorway, arms crossed, and said only, "We'll be fine without you. We always are." I kissed my daughter, I shouldered my bag, and I flew halfway around the world, believing my family was simply difficult, not dangerous. My best friend Priya drove me to the airport that morning. Priya was a paralegal, sharp as a blade, and she was the one person who had never once asked me to be smaller. As I got out of her car, she squeezed my hand and said, "If anything ever feels wrong from over there, you call me first, before anyone." I laughed and told her nothing was going to feel wrong. That was the last easy laugh I had for a very long time. For the first 3 months, the calls were ordinary. Lily showed me her missing tooth, her drawings, the reading award she won in March. Grant was short with me, but not cruel, and I blamed it on the stress of solo parenting. I sent money home every payday, mailed Lily a package every 2 weeks, and counted down the days on a whiteboard above my cot. I had no idea that back home, my mother-in-law had already found a man online who sold something she wanted very badly, a document, a weapon dressed up as science. The change did not arrive all at once. It arrived like weather. In April, the weekly calls started slipping to every 10 days, then every 2 weeks. Grant always had a reason, a soccer practice, a nap, a spotty connection, and I believed him because I wanted to. When I did reach Lily, Diane was always in the background, correcting her, hovering, once even taking the phone from my daughter's hands to tell me Lily was tired. In May, I noticed $43,000 had moved out of our joint savings in 3 separate transfers. When I asked, Grant said the roof had failed and the water heater had burst, and he sent me 2 blurry photos that could have been any roof, anywhere. I was 8,000 miles away, with no way to verify anything, so I approved it, and I hated how easily I approved it. In June, my aunt by marriage messaged me something strange. She wrote, "We're all praying for you and Lily through this hard time, whatever the truth turns out to be." I stared at that message for an hour. I did not know what hard time she meant. I did not know there was a truth being discussed. I called Priya that night from the phone tent, my voice careful, and I read her the message. She went quiet in the way she does when her paralegal brain starts moving. She said, "Mara, has anyone asked you to sign anything? Has Grant mentioned lawyers?" I said no, because as far as I knew, he had not. She said, "Send me a screenshot of that message, and do not tell them we talked." I did not understand yet why she sounded frightened for me. I would understand soon enough. Here is what was happening in my house while I slept in a tent under a foreign sky. Diane had spent the spring telling anyone who would listen that Lily looked nothing like Grant. She found a website that promised discreet paternity results with no clinic visit required, run by an outfit calling itself Gen Trust Labs. For a fee she paid in cash, they would produce an official-looking report that said whatever a customer needed it to say. Grant swabbed Lily one night while she slept, mailed it in with a sample he claimed was his own, and paid for the result he wanted. 3 weeks later, a glossy report arrived, stamped with a seal, declaring a 0% probability that Grant was Lily's father. It was a lie printed on nice paper. But nice paper, waved in front of frightened relatives, looks a great deal like proof. Grant, meanwhile, had built himself an audience. He posted long messages online about the hardship of raising a child alone, while his wife chose deployment over her family. He never used the word test in public. He only hinted. He only sighed in text. He only asked for prayers. Relatives who had eaten at my table began sending him money and casseroles and sympathy. My name, in that little online crowd, quietly became the name of the woman who had wronged a good man. Diane started having Lily call her mom, gently, as a game, and correcting her when she slipped, and set it to a photo of me. Grant's brother Kyle, who owed me nothing, agreed to say that I was cold and absent. The story hardened around me while I was too far away to touch it. On the 17th of July, I missed Lily's 6th birthday. I had arranged, weeks in advance, to video call during her party so I could watch her blow out the candles. When I dialed at the agreed hour, no one answered, not Grant, not Diane, not the house line. I called 11 times over 2 hours, from a satellite line that cost me a favor I would spend months repaying. The next day, Grant sent a single photo of the cake, already cut, and a message that said, "She had a great day, didn't even ask about you." I read that sentence 40 times, and each time it took a little more out of me. What I learned later was that Diane had told the guests I was too busy overseas to bother calling my own child. She was building witnesses. Every missed moment she engineered became testimony she could use. In August, Grant sold my grandmother's sewing table at a yard sale for $30. He did not need the $30. He needed me to have less of myself in that house when I returned. He told Lily the table had been broken, and he told me nothing at all. By September, I could feel the shape of something even through the distance and the silence. My requests to call home were suddenly met with a busy tone or a child who sounded coached. Once, Lily whispered into the phone, "Daddy says I shouldn't talk to you for too long." And then the call ended. I sat in the dark of the phone tent, long after the line went dead, holding a receiver that only hummed. I did not know the word for what was happening to me yet. Priya did. She had started, quietly, pulling public court records back home, and what she found made her stop sleeping too. In October, another $11,000 left our account, marked only as repairs, the same excuse as before. I asked Grant on what turned out to be our last real call, and he repeated the word repairs, and then he hung up before I could answer. That was the final time I heard my husband's voice, before I heard it in that doorway. If you have ever been the last person to learn what your own family had already decided about you, you know the exact cold that moved through me when I finally understood. In the last month before my return, the calls stopped completely. Grant told me the phone was broken, then that Lily had a fever, then that she was staying with Diane for a while. What he did not tell me was that on the 14th of that month, he had walked into a family courthouse. He filed for emergency temporary custody, and he attached 2 things to his petition. The first was a statement claiming I had abandoned my child for my career. The second was the Gen Trust report, offered as evidence that our marriage was built on my deception. He paid a retainer of $6,000 to a family attorney on the 20th, using the last of our savings. He told the attorney a clean, terrible story: a cheating wife, a fatherless child, a betrayed husband with paper to prove it. The attorney, believing his client, moved fast and moved hard. A process server came to my listed address back home and found no one, which Grant later spun as me hiding. The emergency order was granted on paper, without me ever knowing a case existed, because I was in a place where legal mail does not reach a tent. By the time a copy finally caught up to me, forwarded through 3 offices, I had 6 days left in country. I read it standing in the chow line, and the tray shook in my hands, and a sergeant I barely knew steadied my elbow. The petition described a woman I did not recognize, a serial liar, an absent mother, a fraud who had trapped a good man with another man's child. Every sentence was a small knife, and every knife had been sharpened by Diane and handed to Grant. A judge, seeing a document that looked official, and a father who seemed distraught, granted a temporary order pending a full hearing. Grant changed the locks on my house 9 days before I landed. He told my 6-year-old daughter that her mother had done something very bad, and that she should not believe anything I said. He rehearsed the family. He assigned them seats. He planned the exact sentence he would say when I walked in. And Diane, who had waited 6 years for this, bought a cake for afterward, because she intended to celebrate. The cruelty of that cake still stops my breath. They were going to eat cake. Meanwhile, I was signing out of a war zone, buying a small stuffed rabbit at the airport gift shop, imagining my daughter running into my arms. I flew for 22 hours. I did not sleep. I rehearsed her face. I had no idea I was walking into a room that had already sentenced me. So now you know what I was walking into when I opened my own front door. The family on the couch, the paper in Grant's hand, the sentence he had rehearsed. The results came back. Mara, Lily was never mine, and everyone here knows what you did. The room waited for me to collapse. I felt every eye pushing me toward the floor, but I had spent 11 months making decisions while exhausted and afraid, and this was only one more. I looked at Lily first, only at Lily, and I said, "Hi, baby. I missed you every single day." Then I turned to Grant, and I held out my hand, and I said, "Let me see it." He hesitated, because a guilty person always hesitates when you ask to look closely. I took the report. I read the header, and I saw two things at once. The lab was called Gen Trust, a name I had never encountered in 4 years of Army paperwork, and the collection date printed on it was a Tuesday in March, when I knew for a fact I had been overseas and Grant had been home alone with our daughter. I did not announce any of that. I simply took out my phone and I photographed every page. Grant said, "You can take all the pictures you want. It doesn't change the truth." I said, "You're right, it doesn't." And I meant something very different from what he heard. Diane told me to pack a bag and leave the house that my service had bought. I picked up my daughter. I held her for one long moment, and I whispered that I would always come back for her. Then I set her down gently. I walked out the door with my head level, and I did not let them see my hands shake until I reached the car. In the car, I called Priya, and this time I did not keep my voice careful. I told her everything: the couch, the report, the wrong date, the lab I had never heard of. Priya was silent for 3 seconds, and then she said the words that changed the war. "Mara, do you still have the paternity test from the enrollment, the real one, the accredited one?" And I remembered the drawer, the winter clinic, the barcodes, the woman named Sandra who had sealed our samples with her own hands. I said, "It's in the fireproof box in the garage, if he hasn't found it," Priya said. "Then we don't argue with his lie. We bury it under the truth, with a chain of custody a judge cannot ignore." That night I did not sleep in my house, because I was locked out of my house. I slept on Priya's couch, and instead of crying, we built a file. We pulled my deployment records, proving where I stood on the collection date, printed on his fake. We found the original accredited report in the garage box 2 mornings later, sealed and intact, 99.99%. And Priya made one phone call that Grant never imagined, to the laboratory that had run the real test 4 years earlier. Sandra Okafor still worked there. She remembered chain of custody law the way I remembered my rifle. When she heard what had been done with a forged report, she agreed to provide a notarized statement and, if needed, to testify. I also walked into the base legal office, and a JAG attorney read Grant's petition and went very still. He said a soldier's child and a soldier's home are not things a spouse gets to steal with a printout. For the first time since I had landed, I was not the one being sentenced. I was building the case. Over the next week, Priya and I worked at her kitchen table until 2 most mornings. We built a timeline that placed me, by orders and flight manifests, on another continent for every date Grant's report claimed. We printed the deployment calendar, the boarding passes, the duty logs, and we tabbed each one in red. We requested, through the base, an official verification of my whereabouts on the collection date, and it came back in writing. We photographed the sealed original report from every angle before we let it out of our hands, and Captain Ruiz drafted a filing that did not beg the court for mercy. It informed the court of a crime. I stopped feeling like a woman defending herself. I started feeling like a soldier again. For 11 days, I had lived out of a duffel bag on my best friend's couch. For 11 days, Grant had told everyone the hearing was a formality. He believed the paper on his side was stronger than the truth on mine. He did not understand that a forged document is only powerful until someone competent looks at it closely. I had spent 11 years being looked at closely by people who wanted me to fail. I knew how to survive a room. The hearing was set for a Thursday morning, but before it, both sides met in a conference room to try to settle. Grant walked in like a man collecting a prize. He brought Diane, who wore her good coat. He brought Kyle, who would not look at me. He brought his attorney, a tired man with a thick folder. On my side sat Priya, my JAG advisor Captain Ruiz, and a laptop open to a video call. Diane leaned toward one of the aunts and murmured that this would all be over by lunch. She was right about the timing. She was wrong about everything else. Grant's lawyer slid the GenTrust report across the table and said his client had scientific proof of paternity fraud. He asked us to accept full custody for Grant and a quiet divorce. Captain Ruiz did not raise his voice. He never once raised his voice. He simply opened a folder of his own, and he began to place documents on the table, one at a time. The first page, my deployment orders, stamped and official, showing I was 8,000 miles away, on the collection date printed on Grant's report. A father cannot swab a child, Ruiz said. On a day, the mother was on another continent, and the father was the only adult home. He let that sit. He did not rush to the next page. He wanted every person on Grant's side of the table to feel the weight of a fact that could not be argued with. The second page, a records request to the state, showing that no laboratory named GenTrust held any accreditation anywhere in the country. This is not a lab, Ruiz said. This is a website that sells outcomes. Diane's smile faltered for the first time. I watched her recalculate, the way a gambler recalculates when the second ace lands in someone else's hand. Grant's own attorney turned to look at his client with a new expression, the look a professional gives when he realizes he has been lied to. He had built his morning around a document, and the document had just dissolved in front of him. He frowned. He asked to see the page, and he read it twice. Then he set down his pen. The third page, the original accredited paternity report from 4 years earlier, sealed, barcoded, signed. 99.99% probability that Grant Mercer is Lily's biological father. The room went very quiet. Diane's mouth opened, then closed. Grant reached for the accredited report, and Ruiz slid it just out of his fingers. You'll want to read it, Ruiz said quietly. You signed the bottom of it 4 years ago. Grant looked down at his own signature, next to Lily's tiny inked footprint, next to the barcode Sandra had sealed. I watched the exact second the floor left him, the second a man realizes his lie has a witness older than his plan. He said, "That could be fake too. Anything can be printed." And Ruiz, still calm, still quiet, said, "You are right that anything can be printed. So let's ask the person who made this one." Then, Ruiz nodded at the laptop, and Sandra Okafor's face filled the screen. She stated her name, her credentials, and her employer. She explained, calmly, how she had personally collected and sealed 3 samples in the winter clinic. She explained the barcodes, the signatures, the tamper-evident bags, the whole chain of custody. She said, "I processed that test myself. The result is not in dispute. He is the father." And then she said the sentence that ended it. "No accredited laboratory produced the other document. I have reviewed it. The seal is copied, the accreditation number does not exist, and the formatting is from a template sold online." The aunt beside Diane slowly slid her chair a few inches away from her. It was a small movement. In that room, it was an earthquake. For a long moment, nobody in that conference room said anything at all. The good coat, the thick folder, the rehearsed cruelty, all of it sat useless on the table. I looked around at the faces that had smirked at me from my own couch 11 days before. The 2 aunts would not meet my eyes now. Kyle had gone pale. Diane had gone still. And Grant, the man who had assigned everyone their seats, finally understood he had seated them to watch him fall. Grant's attorney closed his folder. He leaned toward his client and whispered something short. Then he said, aloud, that he could not continue to represent this petition, and he asked for a recess. But there was no recess that could save Grant, because his own family was in the room. Kyle, who had agreed to call me cold and absent, was staring at his brother now. Kyle said, "Grant, where did that first paper come from? Where did you get it?" Grant said nothing. Kyle asked again, louder, and his voice cracked on his brother's name. He had stood ready to testify against me, and now he was doing the math on what that would have made him a part of. I did not need revenge on Kyle. His own face was already doing that work. So I answered for him, and I kept my voice as level as I had kept it in the doorway 11 days before. I said, "He bought it, and your mother paid for it in cash." Diane stood up too fast and knocked her chair back. She said it was a lie, that she had done nothing, that this was a persecution. And that is when Priya slid one last page across the table, a copy of a money order, traced, dated, and signed, in Diane's own careful handwriting, made out to the account behind the GenTrust website. Priya said, "You wrote the memo line yourself, Diane. It says, for Lily's test." For 6 years, Diane had studied me across her reading glasses, deciding I was the liar. Now every person in that room was studying her. Diane looked to Grant to save her, and Grant would not lift his eyes from the table. She looked to the aunts, and the aunts looked at their hands. For the first time in the 6 years I had known her, Diane had no audience left. The good coat did not help her then. Grant tried, at the very end, to reach for the oldest trick he had. He turned to me and softened his face and said, "Mara, think about Lily. Think about our family." I looked at the man I had once married across 8,000 miles of trust he had spent. And I said the only thing left that was true. I said, "I did think about Lily. That is the entire reason you lost." Grant opened his mouth to answer, and found he had nothing left to say. The room that he had filled with witnesses to my shame was now full of witnesses to his. Diane reached for her purse with a shaking hand, as if leaving early could unmake what everyone had just seen. It could not. Some rooms you do not get to walk out of the way you walked in. Then I gathered my documents. I closed my folder, and I let the silence finish what I had started. The settlement Grant had wanted evaporated inside an hour. His attorney withdrew that same afternoon, unwilling to attach his name to a forged document. At the Thursday hearing, the judge who had granted the emergency order read Captain Ruiz's filing and the notarized statement from Sandra. She vacated the temporary custody order from the bench. She granted me primary physical custody of Lily, and she ordered Grant's parenting time supervised until further review. Then she did something I had not dared to hope for. She referred the forged report to the county for possible criminal charges, naming both Grant and Diane. Filing a fabricated document in a custody case is not a family squabble. It is fraud upon the court. Grant lost the house within 90 days because the house had never truly been his. The loan and the deed traced back to my service, and no amount of resentment had changed the paperwork. The $43,000 he had drained was documented in the same file that undid him, and the court ordered repayment. Kyle called me 2 weeks later. He did not make excuses. He simply said he was sorry, and that he had believed the wrong brother. The aunts who had prayed for Grant online went very quiet, and one of them mailed me a short letter that began with the word ashamed. Diane did not apologize. People like Diane rarely do. But she found that the family she had ruled for decades no longer answered her calls the way they used to. The woman who had waited 6 years to celebrate ended up alone with a cake nobody came to eat. Grant tried, months later, to petition for expanded time, and the supervised visits told their own story. Lily was cautious with him now, polite but distant, the way a child is with someone who once frightened her. I never spoke a single cruel word about her father in front of her. I did not have to. The truth had already spoken for itself. Priya refused to take a cent for the 100 hours she had given me. So I did the only thing she would accept. I made her Lily's godmother, in front of everyone, on a bright afternoon that felt like the opposite of that living room. And Sandra Okafor, the technician who had sealed 3 samples in a winter clinic and remembered it 4 years later, received a letter of commendation I wrote myself, because a careful person had saved my daughter without ever knowing she would. We stayed in the house that my service had bought. I painted Lily's room the pale green she had asked for, over a video call from a war zone. The stuffed rabbit from the airport gift shop still sits on her bed, a little worn now, still guarding her. Some nights, after she is asleep, I sit in the quiet, and I think about the woman who walked into that ambush, 11 months of exhaustion deep. I do not blame her for staying level in that doorway. I am proud of her. She was protecting more than herself. People ask me how I did not fall apart when my husband held up that paper in front of a room built to break me. The answer is not that I am strong. The answer is that I knew who I was, and no forged document can outvote that. Here is what those years taught me, and it is the only thing I want you to carry away from this story. The people who truly belong to you do not require proof that you are worthy of love. They do not audit you. They do not keep a report in a drawer to use against you later. A family that needs a fake test to remove you was never really holding you in the first place. Boundaries are not cruelty. Walking out of that living room with my head level was not coldness. It was survival, and it was love. I gave 11 months of my life to protect strangers, and I came home to learn that the hardest thing to defend is your own name. But I defended it, not by screaming, not by begging, but by refusing to burn the receipts that quiet people are always told they will never need. Lily is 9 now. She knows her mother left for 11 months and came back and never let go again. That is the only test that ever mattered. She is mine, because I showed up, because I fought, because I stayed, and no one, not a mother-in-law with a good coat, not a husband with a forged page, will ever again get to decide whether I belong at my own table. If this story reached something in you, I hope it reaches the part that still keeps the receipts. Keep them, stay level, and when the room is built to break you, walk out of it standing.